Hello everyone, we're just over 2 weeks away from the first autumn budget and I'm delighted to be joined by our Head of Policy, Melanie Rees, and we're just going to take a look at what we think we can expect from the budget, and we're also going to take a look at what we asked for in our submission ahead of the budget, and areas where there's actually been some progress already. So, hi Mel, thanks for joining me. As I said, we're a couple of weeks away from a budget, some promising signs heading into the budget, isn't there? Do you want to just talk us through what we've learned and what the speculation's been in the run-up to it?
I think we're in a really interesting place, Steve. I think quite often policy work, you're plugging away at it, you feel like you're not getting anywhere, but you keep asking for the same things over and over in the hope that eventually it'll make a difference. We saw the white paper at the start of the year, and there were some promising signs in there. It was quite planning focused, obviously, but what we learned from that in particular was the need to be really careful about terminology. So when something refers to a new generation of council house building or new social rented homes, we've discovered it doesn't always mean what it looked like. So that was a kind of promising start of the year. But then we had the spring budget. And it's the first time in about 8 years that we haven't done a briefing for our members because there was zilch in there about housing. It was really shocking. And in a way, we'd had several budgets where there was plenty of stuff about housing and not always good stuff. So for us, it was a bit of a mixed blessing, but having put the white paper out there, we would have liked to have seen some content around the resources to back it up. So since we submitted our evidence to the Chancellor's budget statement on the 22nd of September, a whole lot of stuff's happened. Yeah. Things have started moving through the system, so stuff like an announcement on supported housing funding, the consultation around that, the announcement of an extra £2 billion for housing, and it's been described as affordable housing. So we are seeing some movement, and I think in the budget statement itself we might see a mix of re-announcements of stuff we've already heard, plus hopefully some new things as well.
Yeah, really interesting. And as you said there, Mel, we've already seen, haven't we, action in some of the areas. So we've got in front of us here our sort of budget submission. We made 8 key calls, didn't we, really? So let's just have a quick look through some of the big ones. So you mentioned there about the kind of additional $2 billion for housing, and one of our key priorities was delivering more genuinely affordable homes. Do you want to just talk us through what we've seen already and what we might hope for in the budget?
Yeah. Our members and people out there have probably seen us talk a lot about the need for genuinely affordable housing, and that's partly because the term affordable's become a little bit too lax, really, and what is described as affordable often isn't. So we're talking specifically about social rented homes, and our modelling has shown we lost about 120,000 of those between 2012 and 2016. Through a combination of measures like right to buy, selective demolition, converting secure tenancies to assured tenancies with affordable rents. So the supply is decreasing, so we urgently need to do something about that. So although the £2 billion to the end of the Parliament was welcome, we've asked for £1.5 billion a year to the end of the Parliament. We think that will contribute around 28,000 social rented homes between now and 2022. And that isn't about new money, it's about reprioritising. So there's money in the housing budget for starter homes. We think by taking some of that and moving it, we could make quite a big contribution to new social rented homes.
Yeah, and what did you make of that $2 billion announcement? It was kind of set up really to be the big announcement of Theresa May's speech, although that wasn't the most noteworthy part of her speech in the end, obviously. No. Do you think that was a big announcement? Do you think that that's really going to get us where we need to be in terms of housing funding?
Yeah. In a way, it's a big announcement in that it shows we're starting to win the argument about the need for investment of that kind. We can say it's not enough, But it's a sign that we're being listened to and the sector's being listened to, which I think is really important, because for some time before that we didn't feel we were getting anywhere. So I think that was a significant announcement. In terms of what it will deliver in real terms, there were lots of ifs and buts. It turned out it would be homes at affordable rent unless you could demonstrate in your local area that you really needed social rented homes. So that's an obstacle already. And although initially it was described as council housing, it became clear that it was for housing associations and councils as well, and that there'd be a bidding process. So, you know, with that in mind, there were some caveats around it.
Yeah, okay. So that's really useful. Let's talk very briefly, because we've seen a lot of stuff happen. One of our other priorities was about supported housing, wasn't it? And creating a sustainable funding model in a sense for supported housing. We've seen an awful lot happen on that one, haven't we?
Yeah.
Do you want to just talk us through what we've seen and where we are now?
Yeah, sure. So the long-awaited consultations come out. We've been waiting for that since the spring. And the real worry around the uncertainty was the number of new specialist housing schemes that have been put on hold waiting for this announcement. So the NHF surveyed their members, around 85% of planned schemes have been put on hold. Given the level of need, that's a real worry. And it wasn't just new provision, it was existing provision becoming unviable. That was a real concern. So as soon as that announcement was made, some really high profile people said, we're going to forge forward now. When we've looked at the detail, I think there are things that give with one hand and perhaps take away with the other. So I think a concern that's been expressed, and you know we share that, is what it means for short-term accommodation like refuges. So planning's done on a local basis, but the way refuges work, people in your area will be housed somewhere in another area, and you'll take people in from out of the area. How do you make sure you come up with a sustainable model that keeps people safe when they need that type of accommodation? So there's some detail we need to work through, and anybody wanting to contribute to our response to that consultation's welcome to.
Excellent. A rent settlement is another area where we find ourselves in the unusual position of stuff having happened, stuff that we've asked for having happened. We asked for a new rent settlement that supports the building of more affordable housing. Do you just want to give a sense of our verdict on what that rent settlement was, and the questions perhaps that may be left slightly unanswered?
Yeah, sure. So on the face of it, CPI plus 1% against a 1% year-on-year reduction for 4 years looks like good news. It certainly gives housing providers certainty around what they can invest in new supply, because of course, you know, that's something that would take a hit out of a rent reduction, as well as investment in keeping their own homes in good condition. So that's positive. I think there's some discomfort because a deal was reached before and was pushed to one side. So seeing is believing, I think, around this. But there's also the concern that for many people living in social housing, their income, if they're on benefits, is frozen, or their wages are static, they're not seeing rent increases. So there are concerns that people are being pushed, maybe pushed further into poverty or pushed into poverty. So, you know, we need to look at it in the round, really. And a lot can happen between now and when it actually comes into place as well.
Of course, yeah, of course. And you mentioned there about people struggling, you know, to pay for rent, and that's the sort of difficulty with that, isn't it? The kind of certainty for the sector, great, but how do people afford those rents? Yeah. And one of our other priorities is about maintaining effective help with housing costs for those on low incomes, and some of that sort of comes down to some of the welfare policies that we've talked about a lot. Yeah. Do you want to talk about sort of, again, you know, what have we seen any progress on that, and what really would we want to see from a budget on in that sense?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was pretty amazing to hear the announcement that the local housing allowance cap wouldn't be applied to social housing. Massive concerns about what it meant for under 35s, who at the most would get the amount for a room in a shared house. Their housing needs don't go away just because they don't have the money to pay the rent. Some landlords were quite proactively working up different housing models, but others, hadn't really started to look at that. And for many, there were concerns about the future viability of homes as well. And let's make no mistake about it. Those homes are needed, and there are people who are ready and willing to live in them, but if they can't afford to, that's where the problems start. So that was really good to hear, and I think a sigh of relief for many people, not least people looking for a home. But there are still things like the lower benefit cap that we're worried about, and we've said a lot about that. Our recent interviews with families affected were absolutely heartbreaking when you see the impact it's having on them and their children and their life chances ultimately as well. So we would really want to see something done about that, and we've put it into our budget submission, along with things around universal credit and the waiting times and all of that. And our voices have been joined by the voices of many influential groups as well. So perhaps we'll see some change there.
Yeah, perhaps the biggest area for improvement maybe that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because you can do all you like on the supply side, but if people can't afford even the cheapest social rented homes, there's nowhere to go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, a lot of those people, because of the lack of options of housing, are kind of stuck in private renting, aren't they? And often trying to afford rents that they can't really afford. And there are issues with standards. And another of our priorities was about addressing that, really, about addressing that insecurity and also quality and sort of service in the private renting sector. And again, we have seen a bit of progress on that, haven't we? Do you want to just talk through what we've seen and again, if there's anything else that we might want to see in the budget?
And I think what's important about our submission, because CIH has crossed tenure in its approach, we've got asks in there that are about housing generally and specifically about the private rented sector also, because 20% of the population are living in that sector now, so it's really important we have regard to that. And for a long time we've been saying that there are landlords who are not deliberately doing the wrong thing, they just need help and support to do it. There's the hardcore that are often called rogue landlords who are operating outside the law, and we've been supportive of measures to tackle those in the Housing and Planning Act. But for some time we've been saying, how about incentivising landlords? So we're talking carrot rather than stick there. So at the moment, however good a landlord you are, you get the same tax allowances. So we're saying landlords who meet certain standards in terms of quality of management and maintenance should enjoy better tax allowances than those who are flouting the law and really not bothered. The other thing we're doing work on, we know that the single biggest cause of homelessness is short hold tenancies coming to an end, and this churn is a real problem. There are more and more vulnerable people living in the private rented sector, people with children. To have to move every 6 months is really destabilising for them. So we're starting to work up some thoughts about what longer term tenancies might look like, how you could come up with something that would reassure landlords and not put them off letting out homes. But I think it's something that's the next thing that needs attention.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And then another thing that we've talked about an awful lot and has always been a big thing of ours is the role of local authorities, isn't it? In this sense that actually, if we're ever going to get to the numbers of housing and generally just the provision of housing that we need, that councils are going to have to play a really significant part in that. I mean, that feels like it's something that the government has actually sort of very much started to listen to. We saw all the stuff about bespoke council deals and other means of supporting councils. Are we there yet, though? And what else would we like to see happen?
Yeah, sure. I think, again, it's another example where persistence is paying off. But we're not there yet, as you say, and we need to keep on with this. Certainly, there are 3 local authorities, Stoke, Sheffield and Newark and Sherwood Council and its Almo, in conversations about bespoke deals. We've heard that there might be another 7 or 8 as well in the mix. But I think there are some basic things that might not cost a lot or cost the Treasury anything that would make a massive difference. So things like local authorities having more flexibility about how they spend receipts from right to buy. The minute there's a 3-year restriction, well, sometimes it can take time to get things up and running. When we did a survey a couple of years ago, that came back as a key barrier. Being allowed to keep all or more of the capital receipts as well can really make a difference in terms of making schemes stack up. And on regeneration schemes, being allowed to use that funding alongside other funding as well would make a difference. We've talked a lot about raising the borrowing caps or being more flexible on that. I think there's still work to do to convince government on that one, but we'll keep trying.
Yeah, seems like a case of that one sort of introducing policies that match the rhetoric, really,
yes,
doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Another big priority of ours is obviously homelessness, something again that we, among many other organisations, are consistent. Have a consistent voice on. We've seen the Homelessness Reduction Act, haven't we, which is a great, which represents brilliant progress, but ultimately this is a huge problem, isn't it? What more do you think we need to see the government consider on on homelessness and rough sleeping?
Yeah, certainly the Homelessness Reduction Act is something to be pleased about, but it was a private member's bill. We mustn't forget that. But what was really positive, we learned from the experience in Wales and Scotland and the positive work that had been done there around that. So that's an interesting aspect of devolved policy making. We can learn from what others are doing. I think our big concern, yes, some funding's been made available to support it, but we know, talking to members working for local authorities, they're really concerned. Without additional funding to make this work, it's going to be a real missed opportunity, and government has put some funding towards it, but we need more. We need it to be protected just for that purpose and not available to spend on other things. That's absolutely key, that's addressed. And also to do something about rough sleeping, it was in the Conservative Party manifesto to take a housing first approach, where you house people first and then sort out the other things around them. That doesn't happen by itself. It's going to need support, it's going to need focus, and we also think it's really important to have a cross-government department strategy here. We talked earlier about welfare policy contradicting housing policy. This is a key example of that.
Yeah, very much so. And finally, our and certainly last but by no means least, this I think it's fair to say, we talked about existing homes, didn't we? Because that's an issue. We talk all the time about supply and affordability, and rightly so, because we need so many new homes. But actually, what about the existing homes, and what are we saying about investment in those existing homes, particularly taking into account recent events that have happened?
Sure. Well, there was a big push for social landlords to reach the decent home standard by 2010, and we saw unprecedented investment in homes in the period up till then. But of course, homes become non-decent every day, and it's quite a low standard. We've been worried about things like the 1% rent reduction, for example, and other things affecting income streams, meaning landlords just don't have the resources to invest in the way that they need to maintain that standard. But of course, a number of landlords, depending on the homes that they have, will have to do some remedial works now in the light of the findings, or what happened at Grenfell. We're still waiting for findings there. They don't have the money to fall back on quite often. So one of the things we've suggested is some sort of arrangement where they're supported to do the work. That might be revolving loans, so they loan the money, they pay it back over a period of time, recognising that finding that money up front is going to be a big ask for them.
Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks, Mel.
Okay.
You can find our full budget submission on the website, and obviously on the day itself, we'll be putting out a full reaction, and Mel's team, as always, will be putting together, well, not as always after last year, but once again, we'll be putting together a briefing on all of the announcements that have come out, so you'll be able to access that straight away. And if you want to find out any more, you can go on our website, which is cih.org. Thanks again.